How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. I apologize for being a bit late. Had a glitch. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Yehudit in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Sharon in New Jersey, Shandora in the Bronx, Melissa in Great Neck, Joe in the Inland Empire, Leona in Illinois, Lucy in Minnesota, Carla in Brazil, Guy in Ohio, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bell in Texas, Bill in mid-Missouri, Bella in Florida, Paul in Chicago, Karen in Northern California, Jonathan in Thousand Oaks, Ella's in the house, Marjorie in Virginia. We're going to get to why silver matters, but when I encountered this and then I called it the importance of silver today's class, I was immediately reminded of something that Mina and I learned on our honeymoon. So just very quick. When we went on our honeymoon, we stayed in California. We didn't have a lot of dough back then. We weren't flying off to some, Caribbean island or something. So we drove up the coast of California to Big Sur. And one of the places we visited was Hearst Castle. Pretty well-known, really a temple of excess, right? A monument to excess. If you've seen Citizen Kane, that was Orson Welles, who was quite critical of William Randolph Hearst, kind of doing a bit of a satire mockery of Hearst. Not a biography of Hearst, but in many ways based on him. And Hearst, he didn't invent it, but really took fake news to a whole other level. The term yellow journalism, just using his massive power in all the newspapers that he owned to influence public opinion and government policy. I mean, the guy was not a good guy. But what was interesting is where Hearst, who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, born rich, where did that family money come from? And I believe it was his father. I don't think it was his grandfather. But at any rate, the guy who made the money, whether it was his dad or granddad, went to California during the gold rush, right? So went to California looking for gold, and he found silver, and it was much better, right? Because a lot of people went there looking for gold. Most of them found nothing. They struggled with each other. It was very difficult if you actually found gold, to turn it into a big and successful operation. Most of the gold miners, even if they had a nice strike, certainly didn't get rich from it. The original Hearst did, right? Because he was the only one who was mining silver, right? So he was able to corner the market, as it were, and make a massive operation and create generational wealth for his family. Why does this matter? This is it's a little phrase that Nina and I have said over the years, right? He went looking for gold, he found silver, and it was much better. And you see this operating in many places in society. Sometimes it's about, you have your idea, what your dream scenario is, and it doesn't work out, right? And then, you can fall into depression and disappointment. Or you could say, wait a minute, I thought my life was going to go this way. A new path has opened before me. Let me keep an open mind and see what this is all about. Maybe this is the opportunity that God created for me that I wouldn't have found otherwise. And if you go into it with that open mind, it could turn out to be much, much better, right? Much, much better. Always be, make yourself available to those unexpected twists and turns. You didn't get the gold that you were seeking, but that silver, that second place, that booby prize, as it were, could turn out to be much, much better, right? Not just that it was an alternative, it could turn out to be much, much better. Very often, like, society makes a big deal of the winner, right? Nobody remembers who came in second. But the winner might have his life changed, might, overdo it, get into a life of indulgence and addiction, and it doesn't last. Whereas that guy with the second place and maybe consistent second place remains in the game much longer, builds up, a system, an organization, a following. It can work out much better, right? So sometimes you go for gold, you get silver, and it's much better. Just remember that. Okay, we are going to do 2 pages today. We're going to do the whole 2 pages because they're both short. And with that, God willing, by the time we come to the end of today's class, we'll be caught up to the Daf Yomi schedule. And what a good time to be caught up. Tomorrow, Shabbos begins tomorrow night. And this Shabbos, my friend Alan Cooperman pointed it out to me, that this Shabbos is the 100th anniversary of the creation of Daf Yomi by Rabbi Meir Shapiro. So this beautiful idea that he had, that people could be studying the same page of Talmud no matter where they were learning, anywhere in the world, and a person could travel, leave his community, join a Jewish community somewhere else, and fall right into the class and be learning on the same schedule as the people that he left. And now, he's got a new group right away, a new structure right away, and he can keep learning. And, I fell into Daf Yomi accidentally in 2005. I never would have imagined that I would be something called the accidental Talmudist, teaching Daf Yomi with this wonderful group of people. This class means so much to me and Nina that we do this together every day. And none of that would have existed but for Meir Shapiro, who I think suggested it at a Congress of the Aguda in 1923, presented this idea and people ran with it. Remember also how important it is, that first follower. Maybe you've seen that video about the first follower. No matter how many people have great ideas, right? But if it doesn't have somebody who recognizes the good idea and says, yes, let's do that, and then the thing starts to acquire momentum. So credit to Meir Shapiro and credit the people he presented it to him who recognized a good idea and they ran with it. All right. Our pages today are 10 and 11 here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud, still discussing Mishna number 1 in chapter 1, and looking at the 3 methods by which betrothal is created. Money or its equivalent, a document of betrothal, or sexual intercourse. Definitely not the preferred way to create betrothal, problematic in many respects, but by Torah law, a path that is available. And where we left off yesterday, the sages are discussing how do we know that that sexual intercourse is a valid way to create betrothal? So what they were talking about is that we're deriving that sexual intercourse is a valid method of creating betrothal. And what was said yesterday is from the verse which punishes a Jewish man that sleeps with a married woman. In other words, they commit adultery. From that verse, how do we get that sexual intercourse is a valid method of betrothal? Recall that the actual source for creating betrothal is from the Torah law about divorce, right? When a woman who was married leaves that man, and then another man takes her as a wife and has sexual intercourse with her, then they are married. Like, you think, well, that's the verse that shows that sexual intercourse creates betrothal, but you don't really know that from that verse. You might have thought that, well, there first has to be the taking, which we said this is actually the proof that money or its equivalent can be used to create betrothal. And so you might have thought that you have to do both the exchange of money, right, giving her a gift or her father a gift if she's a minor of something that has monetary value or money itself, and then sexual intercourse together would create the betrothal. How do we know that intercourse by itself is betrothal? From this other verse about punishing with a death penalty. Why? Because he slept with a married woman. How does that prove intercourse creates betrothal? Because it doesn't say married woman. What it actually says is this man slept with a woman who had sexual intercourse with her husband, right? So the Torah language for talking about a married woman is a woman who has had intercourse with her husband. And so that intercourse with the husband is what creates the relationship or cements the relationship. So you still might say, well, maybe that's how we know that they are married, like full marriage, right? Which is nisuin. How do we know that betrothal that intercourse creates erusin, kiddushin, right? Betrothal as opposed to full marriage, right? Betrothal preceded marriage usually by a year in ancient times. So we're still having that conversation. A dilemma was raised before the sages. Since intercourse is not a momentary act, but rather it has different stages, right? Sexual intercourse has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So, does the beginning of intercourse affect acquisition, right? Acquisition in this case means betrothal. Or does the end of intercourse affect acquisition? In other words, if they were intending, you have to intend to create betrothal through this act. Well, what if it was interrupted and they didn't complete their act of intercourse? Was betrothal created? That's what they're asking. So when exactly is the moment of betrothal? And the Gemara comments, the practical difference resulting from this question is in a case where one engaged in only the initial stage of intercourse with her, and in the meantime, she reached out her hand and accepted betrothal from another man. So if the initial stage of intercourse created betrothal, then the fact that it was interrupted and then she accepted betrothal from another man would be meaningless because she was already betrothed. And once a woman is betrothed, she can't become betrothed to a second man. On the other hand, if only the end of intercourse is what actually formally creates betrothal, then if it was interrupted and she went and accepted betrothal from some other guy, let's say through money or document, then that betrothal would be valid because the first betrothal never happened. So that's what they're asking. That's the practical difference. So alternatively, right, that would be a practical difference. They haven't answered the question, is it the beginning or the end of intercourse that creates betrothal? Alternatively, there is a difference between saying that it's the beginning or saying it's the end of intercourse that creates betrothal. There's a difference with regard to a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, who acquires a virgin through sexual intercourse, right? A high priest can only marry a virgin. He can't marry a divorcee, neither can a common priest, but he also cannot marry a widow. He can only marry a virgin. So if only the end of intercourse affects acquisition, well, she is no longer a virgin at the time of the betrothal because she stopped being a virgin when there was the beginning of intercourse. So that would mean that a high priest cannot acquire a woman through intercourse, right? He could not make betrothal through intercourse. For the high priest, only money or document would be available because it is prohibited for a priest to marry a non-virgin, which we learn in Leviticus 21:14. So what then is the law? Is it the beginning or is it the end of intercourse that creates betrothal? Amemar said in the name of Rava, anyone who engages in sexual intercourse has the completion of the intercourse in mind, not the beginning. Therefore, the betrothal is complete only when the act has been completed. Right? So if they were interrupted and his intent was to create betrothal through the act of intercourse in the normal course of things, so what he thought to himself is, we will complete our intercourse and then we'll be betrothed. If it was interrupted, they didn't become betrothed. However, if he stated his intention that as soon as we begin intercourse, we will be betrothed, and she agrees to that, then the beginning of intercourse would be sufficient to create the betrothal. A dilemma was raised before the sages. Does sexual intercourse that is performed in order to effect betrothal affect marriage at the same time that it affects betrothal, or does it affect only betrothal? Oh, now that's a good question. That is a good question, right? So we've said that sexual intercourse creates betrothal by itself. It can do that if they had that intent. But since they're doing this, pretty dramatic act in order to create the betrothal, does this act also create marriage? Or Does it not? Okay, they had sex, it created betrothal, but they're not going to be married until they go under the wedding canopy, the chuppah. Now, the practical difference that arises when you say, that intercourse only creates betrothal, or intercourse creates simultaneously betrothal and the full state of marriage, the practical difference that arises from this question concerns all cases where it matters whether a woman is betrothed or married. Why? Because if they're betrothed and they break it off, he has to give her a bill of divorce, a get, just like if they were fully married. So it's similar to marriage. However, if she brings property into the wedding, into the couple, right? Like she has her own property, she owns a field. So we said when they are married, the husband has the right to the produce of that field. But if they should divorce, she will take that field with her. She brought it into the marriage and she'll leave the marriage with it. While they're married, he has the right to the produce of that field. But that only starts when they're married. It doesn't start while they're simply betrothed. So if this intercourse to create betrothal simultaneously creates marriage, then he would also give the husband the right to the produce of her field. That's one example of the legal difference between betrothal and full marriage. And if he is a Cohen, a priest, is he required to become ritually impure to bury her, as he must do for his wife? Which that obligation, right? A priest does not become impure, does not enter a graveyard and become tameh for the dead for his betrothed wife, but he would for his married wife, right? Once he fully marries her, then he becomes impure, for he's permitted to, even obligated to, but not for his betrothed. If she dies during that state. And similarly, does betrothal through intercourse allow him to nullify her vows by himself without her father's participation? If you say that intercourse affects marriage, he inherits property from her and he becomes impure to bury her, and he nullifies her vows alone without teaming up with her father. And if you say that it affects only betrothal, he does not inherit property from her and he does not become ritually impure to bury her, and he cannot nullify her vows alone. So what then is the law? That's the question we're asking. Does intercourse create just betrothal, or does it create betrothal and marriage? Abaye said, come in here, a resolution from the following Mishna. A father has authority. Now, here's what's going to happen. They're going to state this whole Mishnah, which has a bunch of other rulings that are not really relevant to this question, but buried among the rulings that we get from this Mishnah in Tractate Ketubot on page 46b, we're going to get to the relevant little principle that's going to have bearing on our question. Right, so the full Mishnah is, a father has authority over his daughter with regard to her betrothal, whether it is through money, through a document, or through sexual intercourse. This is when she's a minor. Likewise, a father has a right to items that she has found, and to her earnings, and to effect the nullification of her vows, i.e. a father may nullify his daughter's vows. And he accepts her bill of divorce on her behalf if she is divorced from betrothal before she becomes a grown woman. And although he inherits her property when she dies, for example, property she inherited from her mother's family, he does not enjoy the profits of her property during her lifetime. If the daughter married, the husband has more rights than the father and more obligations than her father had before the marriage, as he enjoys the profits of her property during her lifetime, right? And he's obligated to sustain her. The father could sell her off into slavery, as a maidservant. The husband cannot do that. So what was buried in there that addresses our question, does intercourse create just betrothal or betrothal and marriage, is that it said about the father that he has the right to accept betrothal for his daughter, right? He can pick who she's going to become betrothed to. And I guess he can also decide whether that betrothal is going to happen through money or its equivalent, or through a document, or even he's going to give the daughter to that potential husband for sexual intercourse to create the betrothal. He has authority over that. But then the Mishnah says, and if she married, then other things will happen. So what they're going to say is, well, since our Mishnah distinguishes between the father's authority to create betrothal and what would happen with a marriage afterward. And since one of the techniques of betrothal was sexual intercourse, it must be that when sexual intercourse creates betrothal, it does not create marriage, because marriage comes later. So the Mishnah teaches that a man has rights to his daughter's betrothal through sexual intercourse, among the other methods, and it subsequently teaches if the daughter married. And this indicates that intercourse affects only betrothal. But the Gemara rejects this claim. When the Mishnah teaches if the daughter married, that is referring to the other modes mentioned here, betrothal by means of money or a document. In these cases, there is certainly a difference between betrothal and marriage, while it remains possible that betrothal through intercourse simultaneously creates marriage. So Rava said, come in here, a resolution to our question from a baraisa. A girl, okay. We're going to come to one of these places in the Talmud that is sometimes used by Jew haters, okay, by anti-Semites, to say, look what the Talmud says. It is a vile and evil document, because look at this ruling that it says. And it's always taken out of context, and it is wrong. It's just used to stir animosity against the Jews. Right? So Rava is going to mention a law which includes a teaching that a very young girl, a 3-year-old girl, can get married, and that marriage could be created with sexual intercourse. This, as we've talked about many times, there are a lot of situations that are spelled out in the Talmud which don't happen in real life. They're really in the realm of the hypothetical, and it's to test our understanding of the law. Also, there are places where even if it were to happen, what we're discussing is, in this case, is betrothal created? They're not addressing the fact that for a man to have sex with a young girl is rape, is abuse, is illegal, and has all kinds of other ramifications. What they're specifically honing in on is just under the laws of betrothal, was a betrothal created? Because we know that a father has the authority to marry off his daughter when she's a minor. Okay, so don't get the wrong idea. So Rava said, come in here, a resolution from a baraisa. A girl who is 3 years and 1 day old can be betrothed through intercourse. And if her yavam, okay, so now she was married to a husband, even though she's so young, and the husband died. Obviously, they didn't have children, but he left a brother, so now she has a yavam. She's a yavam, and she has a yavam. And they have a yibum obligation, where they're either going to get married, or they're going to perform chalitza and go their separate ways. So if her yavam engaged in intercourse with her, then he has acquired her, meaning marriage. That's full marriage, right? So the yavam creates marriage with his yavama through intercourse, even if she's a minor. Is this permissible? Is this going to happen in the real world? No, we're just looking at one aspect of this law. And if she is married, one is liable if he engages in intercourse with her due to her status as a married woman. And if she is impure as a menstruating woman, she obviously, a 3-year-old can't be menstruating, so we're talking about a larger class of people here. Due to her status, and if she is impure, tameh, as a menstruating woman, she renders one who engages in intercourse with her ritually impure for 7 days, like any menstruating woman. Now we're on 10b. And he renders impure the object upon which he lies, like the upper one, meaning one who engages in sexual intercourse with a menstruating woman becomes impure himself, and he renders objects upon which he lies ritually impure, tameh, even if he has no direct contact with them. Those are the laws of terumah and the various kinds of ritual impurity that are created, when you touch a dead person, when you touch a menstruating woman, when you touch an object that is tameh, etc. Again, a whole bunch of laws are being listed here, and then we're going to get back to, have we learned whether sexual intercourse, which is used to create betrothal, simultaneously creates marriage? And if she marries a priest, she may partake of terumah from that point onward. And if one of those with whom sexual relations are forbidden by the Torah, like incest, engages in intercourse with her, he is put to death due to his sin with her, and she is exempt from punishment because she's a minor. And if someone of unfit lineage, i.e. a man who would disqualify her from marrying a priest if he engaged in sexual intercourse with her, engages in intercourse with her, he has disqualified her from marrying into the priesthood. This concludes the Baraisa. Okay, now we're going to say, why did Rava bring in this Baraisa? It is taught in that Baraisa she can be betrothed through sexual intercourse, and it is taught separately, and if she marries a priest. So this indicates that intercourse does not affect marriage, but the Gemara rejects this for the same reason it rejected the earlier proof. This is what the Baraisa said. If this betrothal through intercourse is marriage to a priest, she may partake of terumah. It is possible that there are two separate stages here, but a single action, as sexual intercourse affects marriage. We haven't proven that yet. Come in here a proof from a different Baraisa. And Yochanan ben Bagbag already sent a message to Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera in the city of Netzivin. I heard about you that you say that the daughter of a non-priest, right, the daughter of Yisrael, who is betrothed to a priest, may partake of terumah. We already learned this, right? If the daughter of a regular Jew, a Yisrael, becomes betrothed to a priest, once she marries him, she can eat his food that is consecrated, that only priests and their immediate family and their Canaanite slaves can eat. Once she's betrothed to him, right? If they break off the betrothal, they need a get to do it. So once she's betrothed to him, can she eat terumah? The answer is that by Torah law, yes, she could eat terumah, but by rabbinic decree, she cannot, because the rabbis are concerned that if she's still living in her father's house while she's betrothed to the priest, even though she's permitted to eat terumah, if she's eating terumah in her father's house with her father and brothers who are not priests, some of her food might leave her plate and her father or brothers might eat it, which is a serious transgression because they are not priests and cannot eat terumah. So she's not allowed to eat terumah until she marries the priest, full marriage, even though by Torah law she could eat the terumah when she's merely betrothed, right? I heard about, says Yochanan ben Bagbag to Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, I heard about you that you say that the daughter of a non-priest betrothed to a priest may partake of terumah. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera sent back this reply to him, and do you not say so? I know about you that you are an expert in many areas of Torah, so do you not know how to teach laws based on a kal v'chomer inference? The kal v'chomer is like this. If, in the case of a Canaanite maidservant, a Canaanite slave, whose sexual intercourse with a priest does not allow her to partake of terumah because she's not betrothed to him, and yet money does permit her to eat terumah because the priest can buy her, right, buy her as a slave when slavery existed, then she comes into his household as a slave, and then she can eat the priest's terumah. So is it not logical with regard to this betrothed woman whose sexual intercourse with the priest does allow her to partake of terumah, that her betrothal money from the priest should allow her to partake of terumah? When she's fully married, she could definitely eat his terumah. So what the argument that was going on here is, so she should be able to partake of his terumah even when she just simply becomes betrothed through money or a document. But what is said in passing is that if she creates betrothal by sexual intercourse with the priest, then for sure she can have terumah. Right, and then they use that as an argument to say why her betrothal through money or a document should also allow her to partake of terumah. But what we can say is, well, maybe the reason that sexual intercourse enables her to partake of terumah is because it creates full-fledged marriage. And the Gemara clarifies, So just finishing the argument that Yochanan ben Bagbag was saying to Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, if this is indeed the case, the daughter of a non-priest betrothed to a priest should be permitted to partake of terumah. But what can I do? As the sages said, by rabbinic law, the daughter of a non-priest betrothed to the priest may not partake of terumah until she enters the chuppah, the wedding canopy. And the Gemara clarifies, what are the circumstances of the comparison between money and sexual intercourse for creating betrothal. If it is referring to a case of sexual intercourse by means of the chuppah, i.e. when they are fully married, and betrothal through money, where the marriage is then completed by means of the chuppah, well, in both cases, she may partake of terumah, even by rabbinic law, as she is a full-fledged married woman. Or rather, one could say that this comparison is referring to sexual intercourse by means of the chuppah and betrothal through money not by means of the chuppah. So if so, the kal v'chomer inference is not valid, as here in the case of intercourse, there are two stages of acquisition. Intercourse followed by chuppah. And here, in the case of money, there is only one stage. So rather, is it not correct to say that the comparison between money and intercourse is referring to intercourse not by means of the chuppah, and also money not by means of the chuppah? Which would mean that sexual intercourse creates, enables her to partake of terumah. So you might think, well, okay, so then sexual intercourse creates both betrothal and marriage. So that would seem to answer our question. But we're not done. Granted, if you say that intercourse by itself affects marriage, it is due to the reason that it is obvious to Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera that the mode of intercourse is stronger than money and allows her to partake of terumah. But if you say that intercourse affects only betrothal, what is different here in the case of betrothal through intercourse that it is obvious to him that it allows her to partake of terumah, and what is different here in the case of betrothal through money that he is uncertain and must derive the matter through a kal v'chomer inference? In both cases, she is only betrothed. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, actually, I will say to you that he is speaking about intercourse by means of the chuppah and money not by means of the chuppah. And as for that which you said in opposition to this kal v'chomer inference, here there are two stages of acquisition, and by money there's only one stage. In any event, there is a valid kal v'chomer. And this is what Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera sent him, i.e. his statement could be understood like this. If a Canaanite maidservant whose intercourse with a priest does not allow her to partake of terumah, even by means of chuppah, right? The priest can't marry her. She can't marry a Canaanite slave. So therefore, even if he marries her, she's not going to be allowed to, even if he tries to marry her, that's not going to enable her to eat terumah. And yet, money allows her to partake of terumah because he can purchase her, and then she is part of his household and can eat terumah without the means of the chuppah. So is it not logical with regard to this betrothed woman whose intercourse with the priest allows her to partake of terumah by means of chuppah, that her betrothal money from the priest should allow her to partake of terumah without means of the chuppah? Remember, what's relevant to our question, does intercourse create betrothal and marriage automatically, or just betrothal and they're only going to be fully married when they stand under the chuppah, right? So what he's saying is we don't learn from this conversation between Yehuda ben Betera and Yochanan ben Bagbag that intercourse for the purpose of betrothal also creates marriage. We have not proven that. You're saying, well, it seemed to be an assumption that they made in the course of their debate, but we have not shown that. Right, and continuing that conversation that they had, right, Yochanan ben Bagbag said, but what can I do? As the sages said, by rabbinic law, the daughter of a non-priest betrothed to a priest may not partake of terumah until she enters the wedding canopy, and that is not due to the fact that her betrothal or her through intercourse or through money wouldn't allow her to eat terumah, but rather the sages said she can't eat terumah because her father or her brothers in her own house who are not permitted to eat terumah might end up eating it by accident. That's the reason they said you can't do it. That in itself shows that betrothal would allow her to eat terumah, but we haven't answered the question, does betrothal through intercourse automatically create marriage or not? And then Bagbag explains why one cannot accept this kal v'chomer inference involving the Canaanite maidservant with regard to a Canaanite maidservant who was purchased with money. The buyer does not leave out anything from her acquisition, i.e. he completes the purchase in full. But here in the case of betrothal, he leaves out part of her acquisition as the stage of marriage has not yet been performed. Therefore, these two cases are dissimilar, and that would seem to be an argument to say intercourse that creates betrothal does not create marriage. Ravina said that by Torah law, it is obvious to Yochanan ben Bagbag that she may partake of terumah also when she is betrothed to a priest through money alone, as she is acquired with his money. Right? If we say that the reason a priest enables his Canaanite slave to partake of terumah because he purchased her for money, he might have given her the money, by the way. You could purchase, a person can sell himself or herself into slavery. Or he might have purchased her from her previous owner. But in any case, it was money that brought her into his household and enabled her to eat terumah. So if you say, well, maybe it's that acquisition through money that extends the ability to eat terumah. So if he betrothed his wife by giving her money or giving her father money if she's a minor, perhaps that is what enables her to eat terumah. Not just the fact that she's betrothed, but rather that she was brought into his household via money. So maybe that enables her to eat terumah. That's what Ravina is saying, through money. And the question that he sent him, that he's talking about this conversation, this debate between Yochanan ben Bagbag and Yehuda ben Betera. And the question that he sent him is referring to the law by rabbinic law, not by Torah law. So Ravina explains. And this is the question that, these guys' names are so similar. This is the question then that Yochanan sent Yehuda. I heard about you that you say that in practice the daughter of a non-priest betrothed to a priest may partake of terumah, and what we're not concerned about is an annulling factor. This is a new idea, simfon, i.e., that the priest might find some blemish in her through which the betrothal would be rendered retroactively invalid. Maybe the sages are concerned. The reason they don't allow her to partake of terumah while she's merely betrothed and not yet fully married is not that they're worried that her father and brothers in her own household might end up eating terumah, which is prohibited to them, but rather that the priest who is betrothing her, and she hasn't yet entered his house, she's still living in her father's house, but later when he comes to collect her for the marriage, and then he learns something about her that he didn't know before, maybe at that point he's going to say, wait a minute, I didn't know that, she's missing a leg. Or I didn't know, that she's wanted for murder. There's actually, we're going to see that she's wanted by the king's soldiers for committing a crime. I didn't know that. Had I known that, I never would have betrothed her. So at that point, he has grounds for breaking off the betrothal, not ending it through a divorce, but nullifying it as if it had never been. If she had already been eating terumah, that, consuming that terumah would retroactively be shown to have been a transgression. So perhaps that's why the sages said that until she's fully married, she can't partake of his terumah. Right? That's what Ravina is saying. So if so, what I just said. And it is with regard to this issue that Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera answered Rabbi Yochanan ben Bagbag, and do you not say this? I know about you that you are an expert in many areas of Torah. Do you not know how to teach laws based on the Kal V'chomer? So what is the Kal V'chomer if this is the issue? If a Canaanite maidservant who's engaging in intercourse with a priest does not allow her to partake of terumah, and yet her receiving purchase money allows her to partake of terumah, and we are not concerned about later finding a blemish in her that would nullify the purchase, so we don't worry about that, and we allow her to start eating terumah, then is it not logical with regard to this betrothed woman whose intercourse with the priest allows her to partake of terumah, that her receiving betrothal money from the priest should also allow her to partake of terumah, even before entering the chuppah, the wedding canopy, and we should not be concerned about later a blemish being revealed that would retroactively nullify the betrothal. We're not concerned about that. It's a very unlikely event. But what can I do? As the sages said, by rabbinic law, the daughter of a non-priest betrothed to a priest may not partake of terumah until she enters the wedding canopy, not due to this reason of simfon, but rather the reason that Ula said that her father and brothers might come to partake of terumah and transgress Now we're on page 11a. So the Gemara asks, and then bag, if we're talking about that, if the issue is a blemish coming up later that would retroactively nullify the betrothal, then what does bag with his answer, how is he addressing that issue? Right? It's like they're going through the same conversation over and over, but changing what it was that those sages were arguing about and seeing what we learn by understanding their argument through a different lens. And then bag, what does he say about this kal v'chomer inference? And the Gemara answers that he maintains that this kal v'chomer inference is invalid because he does not accept that there can be a claim of simfon, a blemish that comes up later, with regard to the acquisition of slaves. You can't say that had you known that this slave, had this problem, you would not have made the purchase, and therefore we're going to nullify the purchase. Buyer beware. You should have thought of that before you made the purchase. This simfon principle, maybe we can use it to break off a betrothal, but not to break off the purchase of a slave. The reason is that if it is an exposed blemish that the master found on the slave, well, he saw the blemish and purchased the slave regardless. Therefore, he cannot later claim that the transaction was unfair. And if it is due to a hidden blemish on his slave, what difference does that make to him? Why should it matter if his slave has hidden blemishes? He needs him only for labor, and he does not care if the slave has hidden blemishes that do not impair his ability to perform labor. And even if this slave is later discovered to be a thief or a gambler, which are considered hidden blemishes that do affect his work, well, it has come to him, i.e. the slave is acquired by the one who purchased him, and the transaction is non-refundable. Buyer beware. So the reason is that the buyer should have suspected behavior of this kind, which is common among slaves. And therefore, we're talking about slaves as it was practiced in the ancient world, and therefore he suffers the loss. The purchaser suffers the loss. So you can't use this principle to unwind the purchase and sale of a slave. Why are you going to use it as the basis of a kal v'chomer to learn out a law about betrothal? So what do you say? So you can't do it that way. So what do you say? Perhaps he discovered that the slave is an armed bandit and subject to be killed by the government for this. Or he was sentenced to death by the government for another reason and is sought by the authorities. But again, this is not a valid claim, since these kinds of matters generate publicity, and therefore the purchaser is assumed to have taken the risk into consideration. We don't unwind purchase and sale of a slave due to these, problems that the purchaser was unaware of in the slave. So the Gemara asks, now, both according to one master, Yochanan ben Bagbag, and according to the other master, Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, the daughter of a non-priest betrothed to a priest may not partake of terumah by rabbinic decree. We said that over and over. So what then is the practical difference between their views? And the Gemara answers, the difference between them involves three cases. And the Gemara elaborates, if the husband initially accepted her blemishes, there is no concern that an annulling factor might lead to the nullification of the betrothal, but there is still concern that she might feed terumah to the members of her family. If her father transferred her to the betrothed husband's agents, or if the father's agents walked with the husband's messenger, and therefore she is no longer in her father's house, there is no concern that she might feed her family members terumah, but it remains possible that the betrothal will be nullified. Purchase and sale of a slave is not nullified, but betrothal, if you find something about your betrothed that you couldn't have known otherwise and that you never would have betrothed her had you known, is grounds for nullification. Do we answer the question, does intercourse that creates betrothal simultaneously create marriage? No, I don't think we answered that question. But the Gemara moves on. The Gemara returns to the laws of our Mishna, the original Mishna, number 1 here in chapter 1. And the Mishna teaches that if one betroths a woman with money, Beis Shammai say he must betroth her with at least 1 dinar, the minimum monetary value that can be used for the betrothal through money is 1 dinar, right? 1 silver dinar. Whereas, according to the opinion of Beis Hillel, even 1 peruta is sufficient, a much smaller amount. This is like the difference, I think, between a penny and $10, right? Both very small amounts, but Beis Shammai is saying, hey, come on, you can't. even if technically a penny would be okay because it was a transfer of money, the dignity of women requires that we make the minimum higher than that. That's ridiculous. You can't do it with a peruta. But the law follows Beis Hillel. It is symbolic. It's not purely symbolic. You can't use monopoly money. It has to be real money. But once you're using real money, the minimum coinage of real money is enough. Now, what is the reasoning of Beis Shammai? Rabbi Zera says their reasoning is that a woman is particular about herself and considers it beneath her dignity to be acquired with a paltry sum, and therefore she will not agree to be betrothed with less than 1 dinar. Abaye said to him, if that is so, with regard to Rabbi Yanai's daughters, for example, who are very particular about themselves and their honor, and they will not agree to be betrothed with less than a vessel full of dinars due to their status, so too will you say that if she reaches out her hand and accepts 1 dinar from another man, so too this is not betrothal? If the operative principle is the honor of women, so women who sort of have more honor than other women should have a higher minimum amount, right? So is that really the dispositive issue? Rabbi Zera said to Abaye, I did not say that this law includes a case where she reached out her hand and accepted a betrothal. She has the right to willingly relinquish her dignity. When I said this law, I was referring to a case where he betrothed her at night and she did not see what she was being given. Alternatively, where she appointed an agent to betroth her, but did not explicitly tell him how much she wished to receive for her betrothal. In these cases, it is assumed that she is particular about her honor and will not agree to be betrothed for less than 1 dinar. That's the reasoning of Beis Shammai for saying 1 dinar is the minimum amount. Rav Yosef said a different explanation. The reasoning of Beis Shammai is in accordance with that which Rav Yehuda says that Rav Asi says. As Rav Yehuda says that Rav Asi says, every sum of money mentioned in the Torah is in Tyrian or Tyrian, Tyrian, right, from Tyre, the city Tyre, Tyre. So whenever we're talking about money that's mentioned in the Torah, now we're talking about a much later time than when the Torah was given, right? We're talking about from 1300 to 1800 years later than the Torah was given. But what they're saying is that when we're talking about minimum amounts to fulfill obligations under Torah law, we're going to use the finest quality coinage that is available today, right? Like, so for instance, today, when people do a redemption of the firstborn by finding a Kohen and giving him 5 silver coins, what are we going to use? And people will actually get $5 silver, and they'll try to get silver dollars, right? I think they stopped making actual silver dollars in the early 1960s, but that you can find them. So back in Talmudic times, they're saying that whenever we're talking about using money to fulfill an obligation mentioned in the Torah, they would use Tyrian coinage, i.e. dinars from Tyre, which have a high value. And any amount of money set by rabbinic law is measured by provincial coinage, right? When we're talking about Torah laws, we're going to be stringent and make sure that we satisfy that amount with the finest coinage possible. When we talk about rabbinic laws, we're always going to be lenient, and if money's required, we're going to just use the least valuable currency that will still satisfy what's being demanded. So local currency, i.e. that which existed at the time of the sages of the Mishna, was worth about 1/8 of the value of Tyrian. I don't know if it's Tyrian or Tyrian coinage. Beis Shammai follow the standard sum of the Torah, and the smallest possible amount in Tyrian currency is the silver coin, which is worth at least 1 dinar. So the Gemara discusses the matter itself. Rav Yehuda says that Rav Asi says every sum of money mentioned in the Torah is Tyrian coinage, and any amount of money set by rabbinic law is measured by provincial coinage. So the Gemara asks, and is it an established principle that any mention of money in the Torah is referring to a silver coin worth at least 1 dinar? Again, what they're arguing about is the minimum amount of money required to create betrothal, the silver dinar or the copper peruta. Now we're on 11b. But with regard to a claim that someone has not returned a deposit or loan, when the defendant admits that only part of the claim is true, it is written, if a man delivered to his neighbor money or vessels to guard, and the one who's watching the property has it stolen out from his house, Exodus 22:6, and the following verses teach that if the thief is not found, the case is brought to a court where the one who was, charged with guarding the property, he is the defendant, and he must take an oath saying that, it wasn't my fault. A thief came and stole it. I didn't lose it. I didn't use it myself. I wasn't negligent. It was just, not foreseeable that a thief would enter my house and take it. But he's going to have to swear an oath that that's what happened. And we learned in a Mishna with regard to one who admits to part of a claim, that the oath administered by the judges to one who admits to part of a claim is administered only when the claim is for at least 2 silver ma'ah. And the defendant's admission is to at least the value of 1 peruta, the very smallest coin. So if every sum of money mentioned in the Torah is referring to Tyrian coinage, how did the sages arrive at the amount of 2 ma'ah in this case, which is less than the Tyrian dinar? And the Gemara explains, there the law is derived from a juxtaposition, as the money mentioned in the verse is similar to vessels. And just as the word vessels indicates at least 2, so too money in this context is referring to at least 2 coins. And just as money is a significant item, so too the vessels must be a significant item. So that's why the sages said that the minimum amount in question to trigger a defendant having to come to court and swear an oath is that the property in question was worth at least 2 silver ma, and a ma is much smaller than a dinar, right? So we're talking about less than the dinar, but it's still greater than the copper peruta, right? So there has to be a sort of minimum total value of the property in question, which is dealt in silver, but silver of the smallest denomination. And then the person is going to swear that, okay, like I admit that I'm responsible for the loss of some of it, but not all of it. And I think in that situation where when he makes a partial admission that would have been against his interest, we believe him and he actually doesn't have to swear the oath. But we're not really talking about that now. They're just deriving, how do we know what's the minimum amount for betrothal? And the Gemara asks, but there is the case of the redemption of the second tithe, which we've talked about. The second tithe, right, you can sell it so that you don't have to carry that produce from your field when you go on the pilgrimage festival to Jerusalem. Much better for you if you can sell it, turn it into money, and then carry the money with you. But that particular money is now consecrated money that can only be used for your expenses in eating while you're going up to Jerusalem for the festival. So about that, it says Deuteronomy 14:25, and bind up the money in your hand. And yet we learned in a Mishna, in Meiser Sheni 2:8, with regard to one who exchanges copper coins of second tithe money for a sela, Beis Shammai say he may exchange the copper coins for the entire silver sela. This Mishna indicates that the second tithe money mentioned in the Torah can be in the form of copper coins, and it is not required to be in the form of silver coins. So we have a Torah law that is not based on silver coins. This would seem to be an argument for Beis Hillel to say that the minimum amount for betrothal can be the copper peruta. And the Gemara explains that the verse does not say money, but the money. And the addition of the article, the, right, like ha-kesef, the money, that article, the word the, which in Hebrew is the prefix ha in front of the word money, kesef, the addition of the article serves as an amplification. In other words, this addition teaches that second tithe money can be in any coinage, including copper coins, but we needed special language to create that. The Gemara asks, but there is the case of consecrated property, as it is written, and he will give the money, and it will be assured to him. And Shmuel says, with regard to consecrated property worth 100 dinars, which was redeemed for an item worth 1 peruta, it is redeemed. Although the word money is stated in the Torah, a copper peruta may be used. And the Gemara answers, there too, there is a reason for this unusual law, as he derives this ruling from a verbal analogy of the terms money mentioned here and money from tithes. Consequently, one may use any type of coin in this case as well, But that doesn't prove that you can use a copper peruta for betrothal. So the Gemara asks, but there is the case of the betrothal of a woman. As it is written, when a man takes a woman and engages in sexual intercourse with her, and one derives betrothal through money by a verbal analogy of the term taking used here, and taking from the case of the field of Ephron that Abraham purchased, and he said, here's the money for your field, take it. And that's why taking implies money. And yet, we learned in the Mishna that Beis Hillel say one can betroth a woman with one peruta or with any item that is worth one peruta. So if so, shall we say that Rav Asi, who claims that all sums of money mentioned in the Torah are in Tyrian coinage, stated his opinion in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai rather than Beis Hillel? But remember, Beis Shammai, the law almost never follows Beis Shammai. The law follows Beis Hillel. So why would Rav Asi state his opinion, right? We're talking about an Amora of the Gemara period, many years later, when the law had already been established as almost always following Beis Hillel. So why would a later rabbi say that his ruling coincides with Beis Shammai when the law almost always follows Beis Hillel? Rather, the Gemara suggests an alternative explanation. If this was stated, it was stated like this. Rav Yehuda says that Rav Asi says every set amount of money stated in the Torah, i.e. when a specific amount is mentioned, is referring to Tyrian coinage, and any amount of money set by rabbinic law is in provincial coinage, which is where we started. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara asks, if so, what is Rav Asi teaching us? We have already learned all of these laws explicitly in Bechoros 49b. The payment of 5 sela for the redemption of the firstborn son, the payment of 30 sela for a slave, paid by the owner of the ox that killed the slave, the 50 sela paid by a rapist and by a seducer, the 100 sela paid by a defamer. All of these are paid in the sacred shekel, which is 100 dinars in Tyrian coinage. All of the cases in which a defined amount is mentioned by the Torah have already been taught, and it is unclear what Rav Asi is adding. And so the Gemara answers it was necessary for Rav Asi to teach, and any amount of money set by rabbinic law is in provincial coinage, as we did not learn that law in that Mishnah. As it is taught in a Baraisa, the sages established that one who strikes another as an act of disrespect must give him 1 sela as a fine. And Rav Asi is teaching that one should not say, what is the meaning of 1 sela? It is the Tyrian sela worth 4 dinar. Rather, what is the meaning of 1 sela? This is the sela of provincial coinage, which is worth half a dinar, as people commonly call half a dinar by the name sela. That's what I've got for today. Let's check questions and comments. So have we established what's the minimum amount for betrothal using money? Yeah, because we follow Beis Hillel. How did Beis Hillel derive that a peruta is the minimum amount? It must be because that amount, setting the amount, that's by rabbinic law. Creating betrothal is by Torah law. Or perhaps there's something else that we'll learn tomorrow. Okay, Lucy. If a father betroths a young girl to someone through intercourse, does that affect her right to refuse marriage when she is of age? No, she still has that right. A father can marry off his daughter when she's a minor, but as we learned in Tractate Kesuvos, she has the right when she reaches majority to reject the husband that her father arranged the marriage with her for. Bill, question about betrothal nullification. A woman must give what we would today call active and enthusiastic consent to her marriage. She cannot be compelled. Correct. So, can she, upon meeting her betrothed for the first time, void her prearranged betrothal on the grounds of some matter in him that she couldn't have known before meeting him? Yes. Yes. Right? Yes. But the father has the right to betroth her, not to marry her. That's what's interesting. Right? She can reject that betrothal. Now, if she's going into the husband, the betrothed man's household, even while she's a minor, I guess it does become marriage. And so she's forced into that marriage by her father. But when she becomes an adult, then she has the absolute right to reject it. And it's not a divorce. She says, I don't want it. She nullifies that marriage as if it had never been. Right? As if it had never been. She's not a virgin anymore, so she can't marry a high priest. But everyone else, she's perfectly permitted to marry, and she's not a divorcee because she nullified that marriage. And as for any woman who's an adult, maybe the betrothal was created many years ago when she was a child. Now she's an adult. She's going to go and marry that man. They say that in terms of Jacob and Leah, or Jacob and Rachel, he ends up marrying both. But the idea was that Jacob and Rachel were betrothed when they were kids, and Esau and Leah were betrothed when they were kids, right? That's a midrash. It's not in the Torah. And then, later it doesn't work out for Esau and Leah because Leah doesn't want to marry Esau. She would rather be married to Jacob. Now you can say Jacob didn't know he was marrying Leah when he married Leah. So he did not consent to that marriage, and yet it happened. But of course, all those things happened before the Torah was given. Lucy, regarding betrothal nullification, if a woman is betrothed through intercourse and she becomes pregnant from that one act, can the man still nullify the betrothal, or are they for sure married? Great question. Great question. Because if they nullify the betrothal, it's not a mamzer. A mamzer is a child of adultery, but it is a child, I think, of flawed lineage because he would then have been conceived outside of marriage if we allow nullification in that situation. So maybe we don't allow nullification for the sake of the child. I don't know the answer. Great question. That's what I've got for us today. Tomorrow, the regular Friday time, we'll just do one page because we're back on schedule. But bring a l'chaim so we can celebrate the 100th anniversary of the creation of Daf Yomi.